Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Natalie.
Hello.
So your foundation is so cool because what you do is you really harness the vast power and reach of the entertainment industry for social good. And I know you cover a lot of different topics, but we're here today to talk about democracy and civic engagement. And so beyond the CAA Foundation, you have started both the Civic Culture Coalition and the successful I'm a Voter campaign. So talk to us about those. Where did those come from?
Sure. So CAA, as an entertainment agency, entertainment and sports agency, is very much in support of our clients and the work that they do. But in 2018, right before the midterms, I think we were all grappling with what role can we play in what is going on in our country right now. And we invited some of the leading nonprofit, nonpartisan civic engagement organizations to CAA just to learn about what they were doing. And we invited our peers at other studios and networks, management companies, PR companies, and brands, just to learn about what was going on in this space. And quickly realized that a lot of them were running their own campaigns, and they were really trying to break through the pop culture sort of barrier. And fortunately, that's the space that we work in. So we decided, well, what if we actually used our chits? What if we actually used what we know best and actually created an environment to which voting was desired? And that might make it a little bit easier for these nonprofit organizations to work in this space. And if we could connect them and help connect them to some of these companies that might be a little bit harder to get into, but it's just one phone call away from us because we work in that industry. So that's how the Civic Culture Coalition came to be. We really wanted to create a safe space for companies who maybe had never said the word vote out loud before or weren't really sure how they could talk about voting to their audiences. And so around a large table, we had some unbelievable individuals representing companies like Urban Outfitters and Paramount and Bad Robot, Universal Music Group, coming together to say, okay, we want to figure this out, but we need a little bit of help, so let's do it together. So that's how the Civic Culture Coalition came to be. We really wanted to be a one-stop shop for companies to come in and learn about how they can engage with their audiences.
And then what about I am a voter? Because I think you're wearing the pin right now, aren't you? Very cool. Your hair's covering it, but it's there.
So I Am a Voter is a nonpartisan movement that was started by a group of volunteers that really aimed to shift the culture around voting. And what we did was we sort of studied the way that we want to talk about voting the way that brands talk about their products. We want to be like supreme. We want people to be waiting the night before their polling place to go and vote the next day. And so we, at the end of the day, just really want everyone to say those magic words, I am a voter. And so we just sort of reverse engineered it and created a campaign called I Am a Voter. And it's black and white. It's nonpartisan. We don't talk about issues or candidates. It really is about getting people registered to vote and then going out to vote.
What are some of your secrets? Because, and are you really, who are you targeting? Are you targeting the younger demographic, the 18 to 29-year-olds? Because they vote at, half the rate of those over 65, right?
Exactly. So we exactly right. We're targeting young people. We want to target an inclusive audience. And we really wanted to also target, of course, the entertainment and sports industries. How do we actually leverage these massive networks to talk about voting? And you do that in something that is very simple and clearly stated, and that any company feels safe enough to want to push out on their own social networks. So which is why a lot of our branding and the campaign work is just very simple, because when you tend to add colors in it, unfortunately, it becomes emotional, and people will have a different idea of maybe what it stands for. But if you just stick to something that's black and white,
so that's why it's black and white.
You can't really argue what that is. And the reality is also voting. I mean, it shouldn't be a conversation. It should just be something that you do, like putting on your seatbelt.
Right. So I saw in a recent interview you said we need to teach people how to be of service to each other and our communities. I mean, did we forget something along the way about civic engagement? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, and we had civics in school, and the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. We had our service projects, and we had civics badges. And when I turned 18, you couldn't imagine not voting. I mean, that would have been such an abdication of your civic responsibility. So are you are you essentially having to make civic engagement cool again? And how hard is that?
It's a great question. I think it's difficult because I think now you're competing with the 500 other things that's popping up on your phone and what you're seeing in the news and what's going on in the world. It just is a little bit more of a complicated place to be. But our approach with I Am a Voter is we want to meet people where they're at instead of expecting people to come to us. And that is going to be on billboards, in brands where you shop, on your phone. We did this massive National Voter Registration Day digital takeover on Instagram. And the campaign's only really been around for about 14 months, but we've had 1.6 billion social media impressions. We've gotten about $16 million of donated ad space that I say otherwise would have gone to pizza and laundry detergent and is now instead talking about the importance of voting.
But that's important to you too. I wanted to touch on that as an individual. You are the daughter of Vietnamese refugees. So talk to me about why this is so special.
Yeah. So on a personal note, my parents came here when the war in Vietnam came, and like you mentioned, they were refugees, and they came here on a fishing boat, and they never got a chance to vote. And so when they came here, and they are like such believers of the American dream, as I am too. It was a really important thing that they taught us, that this was something that was special and treasured and something that not everyone gets to do. And now I feel even more fortunate that I get to work at a company that is so supportive of this and our ability to sort of use our unique position in popular culture to help encourage other people to vote.
Before we go to the audience questions, because they're already starting to come in, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the greatest success so far that you have had in the I Am a Voter? And what's next?
Great question. I think it's talking to brands that have never engaged in this space before or have never done something public around civic engagement before. A fun example is Bumble, the dating app, which is Bumble, the dating app, embedded an I'm a Voter badge into their dating profiles. So now when you go online and you create your dating profile, you can say, I'm a coffee lover and I'm a voter, and you can also match with other voters. But how cool. It's all about how do you normalize voting? And so that goes back to sort of our approach with I Am a Voters is sort of really meeting people where they're at. So whether it's, Urban Outfitters is created this beautiful line of T-shirts last year that said I Am a Voter and vote, and they printed the Election Day reminder on all of the receipts for 4 weeks leading up to Election Day. So that just makes it a very normal thing. And so we're talking, when we're talking about how we build content and how we're talking about how we approach brands, it's brands that we use every day, but where you might not normally see this work being talked about.
But I understand you're forming a new group, the Civic Alliance.
Yes. So last year with the Civic Culture Coalition, because we are, from the entertainment industry, the majority of the companies we brought together were sports and entertainment. And now we have this really exciting opportunity to actually open up our network even more and partner with another coalition that is a little bit more housed in the tech space. So what happens when we bring our worlds together and become almost a super coalition and are able to attract even more companies and organizations to this work? Because our hope is that, obviously, that this isn't just a spike that happens once every 4 years, that this is something that corporate America is constantly engaged in every single year. And then through that, hopefully the trickle-down effect is that, normal people like me are voting in their local elections and state elections.
This is very cool. So this will go beyond the entertainment industry.
Yes. Yes, our hope is to get everyone engaged in this.
All right, well, speaking of engaged, a question from the audience. How can an educator like me convince nonprofits to invest in civic engagement? My organization cut our entire civics and social justice curriculum last year. How sad.
It's so heartbreaking, but it's a great question, because I think whether you're an educator or anyone, I think we've talked about how civic engagement is getting cut from a lot of different places. And the Ad Council just put out this incredible report a couple weeks ago that talks about the one thing that most people sort of identify with voting is the issues that they care about. So I think regardless of whether you're in education or social justice, at the end of the day, like the one thing that can turn all of our activism into real change is if you go out and vote. So being able to tie, you can tie voting into every little thing that there is out there. So that might be an approach.
Let's see. All right, another question. Currently, both parties don't agree we should increase the number of people who vote. What is your group doing to protect and expand voting rights and access?
So I'm a Voter specifically is very strictly registration and get out the vote. I think there are a lot of incredible organizations that are working in this space, in the voting rights space.
So you don't lobby in that area?
Yeah, we're not in that area. For us, we'll happily direct people to the experts that are doing that work.
Okay, how do we grapple with the value of social media as a means for encouraging students to pursue civics and the danger that social media poses and has posed to crippling democracy? Interesting.
I think the reality is for the millennials and generations after that, social media is going to be the main point of contact for them. That's where they're going to find the majority of their information, and it's also going to be where those who are not normally contacted by campaigns are going to be getting their information. So whether or not you like it or not, it's the new reality for us, and it's here to stay. And I think it's an element that we're all going to have to figure out. How can we use this to actually engage a younger audience? Because it's the new norm for them.
And a question from Laura. Arts and activism have often been connected. Does the idea of selling and marketing civics tie into the combination of creative and civic expression? I guess what Laura maybe is asking, I mean, for instance, with what your organization does and the Civic Culture Coalition, I mean, you're people who are experts in music and graphics and arts and in words to communicate. So, does this make it you better, I guess, maybe is that what you do?
Yeah, so we're definitely... what we're working on right now is how do we get into writers' rooms? How do we get into the rooms where mass content is being created for larger audiences? And how do we use that as a tool for us to talk about voting, or even just saying words like voter registration and all of that? So how do we use art to inform a lot of what the messaging is definitely important to us, and is something that we see something that we'll be working on moving forward.
And Will asks, should we be concerned about encouraging voting merely because it is cool to do so? Unlike putting on your seatbelt, voting is an exercise of power.
I knew that was going to come back to me. We're really focused on talking to people who don't normally talk about voting, or who may not normally be engaged in this space, or who may have family members that vote, but they will definitely be seeing advertisements by, large brands, and in the communities where maybe civic engagement organizations may not be working. So we're just trying to get people who are so brand new to this space that the only way they might actually pay attention is if it looks like a brand versus maybe a more traditional civic engagement approach. So we're just trying to draw people in, and then once they're in, once they even understand what the word vote means and what the power of that, then we can talk to them about, educating them on issues, educating them on candidates, educating them on all the other things that comes with voting. But we're just trying to talk to the folks that aren't normally spoken to right now.
Right, where it's not a part of their DNA. Once you draw them in, then maybe they'll take that ball and run with
exactly.
it. Okay, what can companies do, asks Anonymous, to put pressure on reversing voter suppression efforts and gerrymandering?
It's a tough question. I think companies have an unbelievable power by encouraging their employees to get active. And I think things like voter suppression and gerrymandering, obviously it's specific to the areas where you're from, the employee network is such a powerful network, and most companies will have an infrastructure where they can, be dispersing information out to their employees and getting their employees engaged and creating specific action steps for their employees to be calling their, individual, their local individuals, and learning more about what that means and what's going on in their states. So I think companies can definitely use their employee base.
As we wrap, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what happened yesterday. There were elections around the country, and it was so fascinating to see turnout shoot up in places like Virginia and Kentucky. And is that perhaps the silver lining in the great gray cloud of intense partisanship that we face today, that more Americans than ever are maybe finally going to engage?
I think it's so exciting. I cannot wait for next year, because what we're seeing now, I think, will only be a small glimpse of what will happen next year, the craziness of what will happen next year. And I'm so moved by all these young people that are showing up on Fridays for the climate strike, and they're spending their Saturdays out marching, and I certainly didn't grow up spending my Saturdays marching. And I'm so inspired by them, and then they're so plugged in, and because of social media, they're learning about all these issues that may be affecting a community that is different than theirs, and they're getting activated, they're going online, they're plugging in, they're meeting. So I think next year is going to be really exciting, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen.
All right, thank you so much. Natalie Tran with the CAA Foundation. Thanks.